1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Lovely. Oh, yeah, look at that. That's so not what I was hoping for, but it'll do. Right, so we have comments on. We have the little screen share. I'm a tiny little guy in the corner. This is good. Volume is on. Sound is on. Turn that fan off. I don't need you on during this. Microphone is here. And this is us just getting ourselves ready. And I need to double check something on my Facebook page because I remember I set this up and I hope it doesn't do a weird automatic live stream from my Facebook. What am I looking for here? I'm looking for something on my Facebook as well, just to see if it's showing up there. Gosh. Oh, look at that. I'm on my Facebook as well. Good. Everything is showing live. Hi, that's good. We're on. Go back to this. Hi, Leah. How you doing? Excellent. So we got 3 people on. So 10 minutes before we kick off, folks, but I just thought I'd come on and kind of get things set up and try and make things look swanky. Unfortunately, with the images that I've got, yeah, we're going to just have to put up with a little bit of a border around it. I can't quite figure out how to do a proper share screen. I need to do more research and see if there's a way I can actually do this neater without all the border stuff. But hey, this is tech and it's fun. Volume is on. Monitors are off. Excellent. 5 people. Hello. So say hello if you're here. Let me know who's joining, folks. We've still got about 10 minutes before we go. Well, 15, let's say, because I always give about 5 minutes at the other side of the hour. But I have 7 people, apparently. I love this new system. Oh, it's so good. Oh, this is Stephanie. Hello. And Leah's here. Wonderful. Excellent. So for those that didn't catch my silly little video last night, I've got a brand new system. I am so excited. Josh, hello. So you actually kind of got up at the right time. What were you doing up at 7 o'clock this morning, your time? Ridiculous, mate. Ridiculous. So I got a new system. It's a bit of software, which basically, oh, hi, darling. My beautiful wife giving me a big heart. Dawn, hello, hello. So yeah, got a new system. It actually does everything I want it to do. I can see how many people are here. The comments are flying through really quickly, which is nice. So there's a lot more. I can kind of see things better. I can do split screen stuff, although it's not the best at the moment because I'm still learning. I need to do a bit more research to see if there's a way to literally do it without the basic Microsoft stuff. Elizabeth, hello. But yes, so we've got about sort of 10 minutes or so before we kick off, but I wanted to come on early, make sure I had everything up and running. Everything seems to be going well. There is obviously that wee bit of lag, it looks like, on the Facebook. But that is fairly normal from what I'm understanding. There's a minute or 2 delay. So if you are watching, well, you will be either watching on Facebook or YouTube, but you might notice there's a wee bit of a delay. Yeah, that's okay, Josh. I get that. There's a whole time difference. Like when you messaged me, I mean, it was 12:30 or so at night here when you messaged, and I was like, oh my God. So I literally went to all my systems and I was checking because sometimes it kind of, like, my phone is still a UK phone, even though it's on a Canadian SIM. So every so often it still puts things at Greenwich Mean Time. And I was so worried that's what I'd done. I'd accidentally posted this for Greenwich Mean Time. So I'm glad. And thank you for coming back and joining me. It's always nice to see your, I can't say smiley face, but you know what I mean, to see you around. Excellent. So this looks like it's all going well. I take it sounds okay. Everyone can hear me okay? just to double check. It reacted as if it was live. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay. That was weird, Josh. I don't know what happened there. But yes, everyone can hear me. Sounds okay. We've got nice levels. Just let me know. Just always trying to make sure that this works well. Camera's in a nice position by the looks of it. Just making sure I've got everything. No, I don't need that up. Oh, too many things. Jason, oh, hey, how you doing, mate? Beautiful. Thanks, Leah. I appreciate that. Just let me know everything sounds okay. I'm looking at my Facebook. It looks like it's okay image-wise. Yeah. Samantha, hello. Yes, thank you. Great. Yep. Yes, there is a strange man at the left of your screen. Very funny, Josh. Yeah. This is, wait a minute. I can do this. Wait a minute. Wah! It's great. I love this new system. It makes me so happy. But I don't want that. I want that. But wait, guys. Be prepared. Because look at the bottom of your screen. Let's try this. You'll have just seen that the ticker has changed. Ta-da! There's so much that can go wrong with this live stream. I am trying to do far too much to make this one seem cool and interesting. So there's a lot of stuff that could probably go wrong. We're probably going to have a complete technical disaster at one point. If that does happen, guys, just sit back and laugh at me. Somebody said last night my typing's like somebody teaching their dad to use email. And it is. I'm literally, because I've got this microphone right in front of me. My keyboard is virtually cut off from my eyes, and I am rubbish at touch typing, so I still have to look at the keyboard. So I'm kind of, if you see me do this every so often, it's because I'm trying to type something. How long did I spend working it out? Not long enough, Josh. That's the honest truth. Not long enough. I literally have been kind of busy juggling so many things that I wanted to give this a bit more time than I did. Hence the reason the pictures that I'm going to be using, I've got this, it's just on the Microsoft whatever picture thing rather than one that I could find that would actually just be the images. But you know what? I only picked this up a couple of days ago. As far as I'm concerned, I'm doing amazing. Considering I'm a decrepit old man when it comes to technology. Must remember to leave it on comments. 10 minutes max. I don't understand, Warren. I don't know what's going on. What do you mean 10 minutes max? What's happening? Is there a countdown? Is something wrong? I hate it when people leave me cryptic messages. Warren, text me if there's something that I need to know. Excellent. Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes to the hour, folks, and I'll probably start about 5 minutes past, just to give a few people time to come in. I see we've got about 17 people. Oh, I get you, Warren. 10 minutes. Answered Josh's quick. Yeah, you know me too well, Warren. 10 minutes max. No, I gave it a little bit more. I did. Hi, Brooklyn. I did try to work it out, but I need to investigate more of the sharing screen options. Okay, that's just how it is. You know, I literally have realized that Facebook Live wouldn't do what I wanted to do, so I had to then upgrade in the last few days. So things will be fine. Look, guys, it's all about the imagination. Just be grateful that I've even bothered to gather some pictures for you to show you a little bit of some areas, because you know I could have just went with stories and said, look at Google Maps, you'll figure it out from there. Now, I will say, and I'll just change my banner again. If you do use Google Maps, I'm going to forewarn you of one thing, and it's this. If you go down to ground level, you know how you can do that street level view, you're in for a heck of a ride, because for some reason Google have combined multiple time periods of images from Edinburgh. So you could be walking down the Royal Mile, which is virtually empty, enjoying the sights, and the next thing you're inside somebody's head, because the next image is the festival and it's just a wall of people. So if you do have the option on a computer or whatever you're using to kind of go on Google Maps and follow the route we're doing and see some of the imagery from that level, be prepared to basically have some really, really varied and interesting scenes when you're roaming. It is quite good fun, but last night I was trying to see if it would work and try and work out if Google Maps would actually kind of benefit this tour, but I don't know. Once we get off the Royal Mile, it might help if you just want a wee bit more of a visual reference. The idea for this tour in the future is literally virtual reality, but, you know, I can't afford that at the moment. You know, I'm just a poor artist. Right, where are we? So that's 1 o'clock, folks. We'll give it about 5 more minutes because people will now kind of potentially be joining from this point on, not realizing that I log in 5 or so minutes early, or 10 minutes early, and then we'll kick off this tour. I'm laughing because there's just so much that could go wrong, and I honestly, I'm looking forward to this, because if it goes wrong, I'm just going to laugh, because I'm trying to juggle this new system and try different things here. Hey, Chelsea, how you doing? I'm good. Thank you very much. I'm excited and nervous about this because I've decided to do something absolutely ridiculous, but it's me and I'm going to have fun with it anyway. I need to pull that up just so I've got that reference point. Too many things happening. This is great. This new software is excellent. It's a streaming software called StreamYard. And it allows me to stream 2 places at once, or I could have gone for the 5 or 6 streams, but I don't have that many things that I could stream onto live other than YouTube and Facebook. But it allows me to do some fun stuff, and it's also quite easy. But because I haven't effectively played with it enough doing a live stream, I'm just I'm looking forward to this bit of fun happening. Right. A couple more minutes, folks. What I do love is I can actually see how many people are watching. Bertha, hello. That is... Now, is that Steph's family? I can't remember. That might be Steph's family. Lorna, hello. Hello. How are you? Oh, I know, Chelsea. Look, the thing is, if any hiccups happen, Chelsea, on this, you guys know me enough that I'll just laugh. I will just have fun. If wee bits go pear-shaped because it's a slightly unusual idea, I will just literally have so much fun with it going wrong. It's unreal. Keris, my little niece. Hi, darling. How are you doing? Wow, my family are jumping on from Scotland as well. That's good. Okay, so a couple more minutes, guys, and we'll be kicking off. Hey, Carrie! Hey! Some of the Calum guys, excellent. Lovely. Oh, this is good. A nice selection of people. Oh, so we'll be kicking off shortly on this delightful tour. So, as you can see at the bottom, if you do have Google Maps and you have the option, if you're not watching this on a mobile phone, do pull up Google Maps as well, because it will give you a little bit more of a reference point to Edinburgh. We're going to be starting on the Royal Mile of Edinburgh at what is known as the Market Cross. You should be able to find that fairly easy. I will warn you, though, if you go down to street level where you can kind of do that thing and walk along the street, they have got it on and off at the time of Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So it's a wee bit mad. It's a little bit You're walking along and all of a sudden you're inside somebody's head. It's a bit freaky. And if any of you are late night or afternoon drinking, that may cause you a little bit of disorientation. Kevin, hello. Your Spirit of Scotland kilt. Lovely. Lovely. I used to work in a lot of those shops when I was in Edinburgh. Okay, folks. Now, as I was talking to my friend this morning, Warren, it dawned on me that it's been about five years since I did a walking tour in Edinburgh, and I think I may have forgotten more than I actually ever knew. So again, I have been frantically revising my memory, and of course, all my walking tour notes, all my scripts, all the write-ups that I did are sitting in a little bedroom in Prestwick at my mum's. And I was kind of like, I could maybe get my mum to send them to me. But of course, she's in isolation like everyone. So she couldn't, I couldn't even get that done. So a lot of my great notes are gone. So I'm really, a lot of this I'm going to be wrenching from my skull. And that's 5 years worth of trying to dig into a lot of extra material that's been put on top. Yes, Joshua, we try not to tell people about my past and my obsession with whiskey. We try and keep these shows clean and no drinking. Okay, folks, we're going to kick off. So I'm just making sure everything's ready. I'm laughing already because I'm just expecting so much to go crazy wrong, and I'm having fun with the idea. And I love the fact that I can keep changing my ticker. It's great at the bottom. Okay, so ladies and gents, welcome to this live stream. My name is Calum Lykan, for those that don't know me. Calum Lykan Storytelling. I'm now living in Calgary, Alberta, but I am obviously from Scotland. And I basically was a walking tour guide in Scotland for many years while doing storytelling. My main profession is storytelling. I traveled the world doing stories in schools and festivals and events. But when I wasn't doing that in Edinburgh, I was kind of juggling doing school visits, storytelling events, and my walking tours. And anyone that knows me knows that I have always missed my walking tours. It's one thing that I've always spoken about. I loved the walking tours. And even when I came to Calgary, I decided maybe I could do walking tours here. And that was a very naive thought, because anybody that knows Calgary, that knows Canada, or any of these kind of American, oh God, that's a horrible term. Sorry, folks. Sorry, Canada. I don't even want that association in this statement. Anyone who knows the Canadias, the wonderful Canadias, knows it's impossible to walk anywhere short distance wise. So it doesn't really work. Also, Calgary, love the city, but the history's limited and very spaced out. So it's really hard to kind of put together a walking tour. So that idea fell flat very quickly. And, I've always had this idea of doing a kind of online virtual walking tour. This is not that grandiose scheme. This is a very dumbed down version. And hopefully you guys will have fun today. It'll give you a wee bit of stories about Edinburgh, some of the famous characters, some of the stories behind the city. There are some images that will hopefully give you an idea of the layout of the city. And of course, Google Maps, have a look because it will give you a bit more visuals. But where to begin? You know what? When I thought about doing this tour for you guys, I thought I better start a wee bit at the beginning and do that by introducing myself. Because one of the biggest questions I always get asked is basically, how I began. Who was I? How did I get into storytelling? So I have some early images, and Josh and some of the Scottish guys will recognize some of these images, because this is how I began getting into performance. This really bad piratical highwayman look. Those are actually real black powder firing guns. Don't tell the UK police that we were on the streets with them. Kenneth, hello. Cassie, hello. And this is kind of where I began when I was running the Royal Mile Armories. Basically, before that, I was doing something else, but we won't go that far back. And I basically loved dressing up, but this was before I actually did any performance. This was before I actually kind of got in front of an audience because I was terrified. I was always so nervous about performance or even public speaking. And eventually, I kind of gave up on that, you know, and got a little bit more outrageous. Now, I put this one in there in case any of the Viking friends join, because this is a really bad early Viking event that we did in Edinburgh. And as you can see, anyone that knows me knows I've always liked costumes. I've always liked dressing up for some reason. But in between doing the armories, when I left the armories, before I kind of got into storytelling and tours, I tried loads of things. Now, my wife doesn't like this picture. She thinks it's a wee bit creepy looking, but I tried street performance. And this is actually my werewolf on stilts costume, which did evolve into what I call the Big Bad Wolf granny outfit. We actually put on a nightie and a little hat, but that fell through very quickly. That never really worked for me. And it was impossible to do a human statue on stilts, I discovered. But I made all this. It was good fun. I was, I was that guy. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, we tried the dancing reindeer. Yeah, this is all stuff a lot of you might not know about me. Every Christmas at the Christmas market on the Prince's Street, I went down and danced out front as a reindeer to entertain the kids and have fun. So this was how I began. This is what got me into it. And then, of course, I realized that none of this stuff was working. So I ended up becoming a tour guide. I ended up kind of getting into it. And this was the first company I worked for. A really good company. Here's a free pitch for them. City of the Dead. And as you can see, I thought I was the most fashionably stylish guy on the planet at this stage. I thought I was absolutely wonderful. I'm presuming everyone can see these images. I'm worried about the lag issue, but hopefully the vocals and the lag between systems might not be an issue too much. But yeah, this was City of the Dead. These were ghost tours, gruesome and grisly stuff into Greyfriars Kirkyard, which we will cover on this tour, and the underground city, which we won't cover on this tour. But yes, I did dance, Carrie. Yeah, not very well. I just kind of bobbed and went like this a lot. The kids loved it. It was great. You know, I once thought I could be a nice guy until I realized I realized I'm just not. So this is how I began. And as you can see, yeah, I'm just, I don't know. I mean, clearly I had an issue. I've always had an issue with fashion sense, folks. So yeah, as you can see, I liked my top hats. I liked my vests or waistcoats. My big leather jacket still exists. And basically, this is how I roamed about Edinburgh doing ghost tours for many, many years. The thing is, I'm now realizing I've forgotten the order of these pictures. So I'm having to look at them to see what's coming next as well. But after I kind of walked away from City of the Dead, you know, I ended up doing the storytelling in between that. And basically, I tried things like this. The ever popular street stories. Hi, Norman. How you doing? And Janice, the ever popular street stories. As you can see, it was really popular. This was my #1 fan and only fan throughout weeks of trying to busk stories on the Royal Mile. Little side note, this did sadly create a huge argument with my partner that I had at the time in Edinburgh, because she thought this girl was trying on with me. I was just doing what I was doing. And as you can see, yeah, there's real issues with the facial hair and the actual hair on top of the head here. And I'm not going to lie to you. Do you see those sideburns, guys? When I shaved my head, they stayed for many, many moons. Oh gosh, Josh, I just saw that picture of Bob. So yeah, this is how it all began until, ta-da, we get finally to where we start this tour properly. This was my first ever tour sign. Basically, Edinburgh has a weird system that you can put tour signs out as long as you can remove them, unless you can attach them. So when I first started doing walking tours, this was a free walking tour sign. And the other side was my Whiskey and Tales tour sign. And if memory serves, those white bits are business cards I stapled on. It's all very weird. But this is how I began on the Royal Mile. And as you can see, 2 different days, 2 different sides, showing you the true nature of Edinburgh. Sunny, miserable. Oh no, there's sun in the background. We've obviously just had a rain shower. But that's how it began, with this tiny wee sign. And after kind of working it, I basically built up and I got to this magnificent beast of a sign. My beautiful sign. And as you can see, I had to padlock it to the bollard to make it work. But this is basically where the walking tours really started. And this is where it all began. And yes, I did have some hair. I don't know why I was keeping this hair on my head. Thank you, Josh, for reminding me of my cardinal sins at the time. It gets worse. I'm so scruffy at times in these images of the Edinburgh tour. But basically, this is where it begins. And we are basically standing outside on the Royal Mile. This is when I tried to get professional with a clipboard. You know, I tried many different things. But here we are. Let's begin. This is basically standing outside on the Royal Mile. What we have here is the Adam Smith statue. This is where my tour company was started from. And just behind it, you have the Mercat Cross and you have the magnificent St. Giles Cathedral. Heading away from us would be heading up to Edinburgh Castle. Now, the Royal Mile and Edinburgh, we're going to be kind of sticking in that old historical zone of Edinburgh, simply because this is where all the fun stuff is for any bit of Scottish history, and particularly Edinburgh's history. So, where do you start with any walking tour in Edinburgh? Well, you start by explaining a wee bit about the history. Edinburgh is a really ancient city. The castle, which we'll not be covering today, is basically a place with over 3,000 years of settlement history. It's a really ancient place in the city. And that was the beginnings of Edinburgh. And of course, as Edinburgh grew, it actually only had one way to stretch, and that was from the castle heading down what we now know as the Royal Mile. And that was simply because of the geography of the area. Edinburgh is actually built on 7 hills. So basically, with the sort of geological, I think that's the correct term, setup of Edinburgh, what you have is the huge volcanic plug where the castle's on. And then you have this seam running down away from it. So, you know, if we want to jump back into really older time periods, you know, the glaciers rip through the country, yada, yada, leaving big gouges. We all know these stories. But when they hit that plug, they couldn't break it down. So, of course, when the glaciers continued on, it left this very kind of long, what we call a spine, really. You know, there's another term for it that escapes my mind, but it's like a spinal cord running away from the castle. So when Edinburgh started to evolve, that's automatically where they started to build, from the castle running along this kind of high ridge line. It meant it was easy to defend. It meant it was a safe place to be. And you could see the surrounding area, meaning if anyone was attacking, you could retreat into whatever was built on the castle rock at the time, whether it be a dun, whether it be a fort, a wood fort, whatever. You could retreat into there. So that's how Edinburgh evolved. The Edinburgh I want to speak about, though, is a little bit more modern, because the fun history of Edinburgh really begins kind of from the 1500s onwards. Because from that point on, Edinburgh became a very unusual city. It became a very restricted, walled city. About 1513, a very interesting thing happened. James IV of Scotland decided, in his ultimate wisdom, to attempt to invade England. I don't want to insult anyone by going through too much Scottish English history, because I'm presuming you know. Basically, it's not good. It's not fun. The Scots have no love lost for England. It's probably a bit like Canada and America. No offense to anyone listening in America, because I appreciate most of the American people that are listening are intelligent people, unlike, yeah, let's not get into that. Anyway, let's do it like that. Scotland and England basically have never liked each other. Basically, they're the worst neighbor on the planet. That's how we'll put it. So we decided to invade them. We wanted to get some payback. And basically, a little battle known as Flodden Fields, the Scots and the English clashed. Now, the thing about Flodden Fields was this. The Scots got there early, we got set up, and then James IV decided to basically ruin the whole thing. He thought the best thing to do would be for the Scots to attack, even though we were outnumbered, even though we had actually taken a position on a hill. We were fairly fortified up there. We were solid. He decides, no, we're going to charge. And he decides to get the Scots to charge down a hill and then back up a hill towards the English. By the time we actually reached the English, we were exhausted. So it was pretty much just a rout. We got wiped out, but there's also a lovely bit of other history when it comes to that. I'll scroll back for a second. And that is basically, we used our age-old attack process known as the Highland Charge. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Highland Charge, folks, this is a very simple idea. Let me give you a brief demonstration. It's very hard in here because I would do this on a tour. You have two rows of army. You know, you have the English, you have the Scots, and they're facing off against each other. Now, the Scots had various tactics. They would start by intimidation. So they would be roaring, they'd be bellowing, they'd be lifting their kilts and flashing their bits, they'd be showing their bums, and they would be kind of doing everything to put the English off. Now, the English had seen this so many times that they were just standing there going, yeah, okay, we've seen it, let's get on with it. And then, of course, once the Scots think that they've got the English unsettled, they then start their next tactic. The Highlanders stare at their enemy. They eyeball the man they're going to attack. They have their targe. They have their basket hilt claymore. They have a dirk coming out from under the targe. At the peak of a Highland sort of fighting, it was said we could kill 5 Englishmen to 1 Scots when we were doing this to the best ability. But the idea is we'd be eyeballing these, you know, the English would be giving it, would be roaring, doing our whole thing, and then we'd start to advance and start to pick up pace and start to charge at the English, constantly keeping our eyes on the one that we're going to attack. And then at the last minute, as we get within striking distance, what we do is we turn and we attack the man to the side. Genius! Because that guy's not defending himself. He's open. You know, all the other guys are ready. They're getting ready for this frontal attack and they're not expecting this side attack. And it was a genius tactic. It really was. Unless you used it twice. Or as the Scots did for many, many years after the first attempt. And as a result, what actually happened with the Highland Charge, it became very obsolete very quickly. The English knew what was happening, so they were ready for it. And at the Battle of Flodden, this was exactly what was going on. The Scots would be charging in, and basically they'd be ready for it. And by that point, I'm saying the wrong weaponry here, actually. I've just realised, but don't worry about it. They'd be charging in, and basically the English were ready for it, and they were basically wiping out the Scots. So as a result, the Scots army at Flodden Fields were absolutely destroyed. James IV, the great hope of Scotland, was wiped out. And of course, all the Scottish armies were basically destroyed. Now, The first thing that Edinburgh heard about this was as a few remnants of the Scots were running by, basically shouting, "The English are coming! Hide! The English are coming!" And of course, this sent the city of Edinburgh into a panic. So the councils of Edinburgh got together and basically said, okay, what are we going to do? And the solution was simple. We'll build a wall. We'll build a wall around the city to defend us against the English. And they started day and night building this wall higher and higher, wider and wider, encompassing the city. And it only took us about 50 years to complete the wall. It was actually started about kind of 1514 and it finished about 1560. So basically, roughly about 50 years to build a wall around the city. And thankfully, in all that time, the English didn't invade. However, history tells us that by the time that the Flodden Wall was finished, 50 years after it was finished, or after the 50 years of it finishing, the English did decide to invade Scotland. But of course, the people of Edinburgh were happy, comfortable, hidden behind their great wall, defended against this English army. If it wasn't for one simple fact. When the English army arrived at Edinburgh and saw the Flodden Wall, they were very confused to what they were looking at, because the reality was there was more holes than wall. So when the English actually came to invade, the history books tell us they simply walked through a hole in the wall and took Edinburgh without any bloodshed. The wall was so expensive that basically we couldn't afford to maintain it, and the whole thing was crumbling away. But the problem with the Flodden Wall is it encased the city's growth, because we were still terrified to go beyond those walls, because out there were dragons, out there were giants, out there was the English. So the people of Edinburgh hid behind this crumbling wall, and the whole city refused to grow for many hundred years. In fact, we expanded to the walls and then we stopped. Edinburgh's city for many hundreds of years was actually half a mile long by a quarter of a mile wide. And in that area, at its beginnings, were about 10,000 people. But towards the end of the existence of the Flodden Wall, before the city decided it was safe to grow, the history books tell us it was anything between 35 to 60,000 people crammed into an area half a mile by a quarter of a mile. And to accommodate those people, we had to come up with some of the cleverest building techniques. We dug down into the soft bedrock, but we also built into the heavens. It's actually said that some of the earliest skyscrapers came from the city of Edinburgh. 14, 15 stories high we were building before anybody had even reached 2 or 3 floors. We were using stone for the first sections, and then we just literally had to build it out of wood. So all of a sudden, Edinburgh is this towering city, but then in between these areas were these weaving, winding, filthy little closes. And all of a sudden, the city of Edinburgh had sprung up, but it then became a cesspit of crime, of prostitution, of the bars, the taverns. It was just a horrible place to live. But you had the wealthy rubbing noses with the poor and the common. It was a brutal environment, towering tenements, weaving, winding closes, and it was filthy, a disgusting, dark place to live. So Edinburgh really embraced itself. It actually became known as one of the worst places to live in Europe for many, many years, and we embraced it with such a passion. It was just it was a horrid place, and some of the stories that came out of it, they explain why it was such a horrid place. But let's move on from our starting point of this tour. Now that you've kind of got a wee bit of an idea, half mile, quarter mile, towering tenements, narrow closes, the Royal Mile that you're looking at, they say was only about 7 feet wide at its peak. It was so narrow, congested, and we were just building everywhere. So let's move on. And you know what? I just realized this is a false picture. This is Edinburgh. This is the city where I grew up in, not necessarily grew up in, but this is where I lived for 20 years doing walking tours. This was the environment that I did walking tours in. Bleak, miserable, foggy, beautiful. But let's now head round St. Giles Cathedral, and let's make sure I get this scroller the right way. There's a wee image of a part of the Flodden Wall, just to show you that the story I have just told you is true. There is actually a Flodden Wall. It still exists to this day. And that is actually a very old sort of painting, ink drawing of the Flodden Wall encompassing this tight little city. It's not the best example, but it was one of the very few that I could find. And I think if I go back, there's an example of some of the wines and closes of the city. As you can tell, I keep forgetting to scroll when I'm talking. That's how excited I am about stories. So this was me actually demonstrating the Highland charge concept. As you can see, though, there were some serious issues with the kilt and the legs at one point. Hiking boots and my kilt socks rolled down. My kilt far too high and those pigeon sparrow legs on display. There's going to be many fashion faux pas throughout this tour. Okay, so as we walk round the beautiful building that is St. Giles Cathedral, it dominates the Royal Mile. There is a couple of features. Now, this is one of them. This is known as the Heart of Midlothian. And there's lots of different kind of stories behind this. But one thing I just want to point out, can you see what looks like a few kind of drying wet marks on the ground here? And what that is that's spittle. I'm going to be brutally honest. For some reason, people think spitting on this bit of stone is good luck. I took this picture when it was relatively clean, but I kid you not, there's days that it's just mucus slick. It's disgusting. They say it's good luck to spit on it. I say it's good luck not to slip on it and fall on your bum when you're walking by this thing. It's sometimes disgusting. However, the best thing about it is people think it's good luck because it's a heart, and they think it's because of the Heart of Midlothian football or soccer team, because that's the emblem that they used for their logo. But it's got nothing to do with it, and this is why I love Edinburgh, because here is this symbol here, the Heart of Midlothian. People think it's for good luck, but actually, if you're going to spit on it, which I highly recommend you don't, please, it's for respect. And the reason I say that is because this exact place marks where the gallows were positioned on the Royal Mile. This is effectively where the toll booth prison was in the big courtyard in front of St. Giles. There used to be a prison, and this was the gallows. This is actually a location where many a criminal or a poor person has lost their life. And the reason we actually ask, or we suggest you, if you're going to spit, do it with respect, is because a lot of the people here were actually debtors. A lot of the poor people that were hung on this site were actually debtors. Okay, so let's take this time period we're in context. We're now living in this strange time where people aren't working at the moment. Maybe bills are mounting up a bit. We're getting a little bit of help. But imagine you don't pay a bill back in old Edinburgh. You're in debt. So what they do is they come and arrest you and put you in the toll booth prison. You're in the toll booth prison. You can't work. You can't make money to pay off your debt. So as soon as you miss your second payment, what they do for you in old Edinburgh is they drag you out in front of a baying, screaming mob of people. They put a lovely wee rope round your neck and they drop you. As a debtor in Edinburgh, it was actually a hanging offence for many, many years. And the Heart of Midlothian actually marks that location. Now, this image here is actually, this bit here, you can probably see just at the side. This is actually St. Giles. Sorry, this image is a wee bit smaller. Some of these I had to borrow from offline because I didn't have some of these at hand. And this apparently is a representation of the Tollbooth prison, but it's actually slightly out of alignment for the markings. If you ever visit Edinburgh, you'll see gold cobblestones all over the Royal Mile, and that actually marks the old locations of buildings that no longer exist. So, St. Giles Cathedral, the beautiful St. Giles Cathedral, me doing a bum wiggle, and there, I think this is the slightly better image, which shows you a little bit more of the St. Giles Cathedral front, and where we are kind of standing in this image would have in fact been effectively a building. That would have been where the toll booth prison would have been. If you see me looking down a lot, it's because I'm kind of having to look at my screen to do stuff. But this would have been where the toll booth prison would have been. However, St. Giles Cathedral has many a great story about it. And the first story I thought I would tell a little bit more about Edinburgh, get away from some of the gruesome and grisly, is a kind of blended story about what was happening, you see, with the old town and the filth and the vileness that was happening there. The rich and wealthy, they wanted out. They decided, no, enough's enough. And they put into construction what is known as the New Town. Now, the New Town, 1760 onwards, don't quote me on that date, from about the 1760s to about mid-1800s, they started building the New Town. And it was over the far side of what was known as the Norloch, or Princess Street Gardens as it is today. And that was where all the rich and wealthy decided to go. And basically what they did to build the New Town is they got all the poor, the downtrodden, anyone from the old town who had building experience to go and help build that. And this is where this story begins. There was two lads from the old town, Malachi from Ireland and Angus, a good Highland lad. And their families had moved to Edinburgh and basically were now living in the old town in that filthy, poor place. And they were struggling like every family to make ends meet. But they had a dream. And their dream was to basically be better than what they were. But to make that dream happen, Malachi and Angus, they had to take jobs in the New Town as builders. And they were working away, labouring, bringing home money to feed their families, their mum and all their brothers and sisters. This is what they did. And they were proud of the work they were doing. But their real dream, as I mentioned, was something very unique. They wanted to be sedan chair drivers. They wanted to be the historical equivalent of a taxi driver. If you're unfamiliar with sedan chair, probably some of you will know what it is. It's that wee box with the two guys that run at the back and the front, and someone sits in and they get run about the city. This is what these guys wanted to do because there was money in that. The problem is, to get a sedan chair, you needed money. You had to get one of the wealthy cabinet makers of the city to make you this contraption. And they had no money. Malachi, Angus, they were labourers. They were trying their best just to keep their heads above water. And basically, they worked hard every day to feed their family. Now, it came to a point that this wasn't working. Newtown was getting on, and these lads were just getting desperate. This wasn't for them. So they came up with a wee idea. And they thought they would ask their employer for a loan. They'll keep working, but they'll get a loan so that they can buy the sedan chair and do the two jobs. So they went and spoke to their employer. But he was one of those offy guys. He was a hard, nasty man, and he heard their idea and he heard them ask for the loan, and all he did was laugh in their faces, and he refused them any money. But to make matters worse, because of the cheek, because they thought they could rise above their station, he wasn't for that. So he even fired them from their jobs. So now poor Malachi and Angus are out of work. They've lost their job. They don't know what to do with themselves. How are they going to keep their families with food and with a roof above their head? And the two boys are just miserable. So they start to think how they're going to get through this. Now, Malachi, being an Irishman, he immediately thinks he's the smartest man in the room all the time. So he thinks long and hard and he comes up with an idea. And it's a really simple idea. And he goes to Angus, hey, I've got it. Here's what we need to do. We'll rob our old employer. He lives down in the grass market. We'll rob him. But what we'll do is we'll rob him with the intention of paying him back. So it'll be like a loan, but we'll just keep paying him back and he'll be none the wiser. And of course, Angus is a good religious lad. And he's thinking, oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. But Malik is quite persuasive. So eventually Angus concedes, okay, as long as we're paying him back, therefore we're making it all right. So it's agreed they'll go rob their old boss. They head down to the grass market and find where he lives. And the two lads are just, their hearts break because he's living about 4 or 5 floors up in one of these old tenements. And they're looking up there and wondering, how are we going to get up to his house to rob him? The doors are always locked. They've usually got somebody patrolling the area at the doors so nobody can sneak in. So these two lads are miserable now. They're thinking, how are we going to get in to rob this guy? But Malachi has it. Don't you worry. I've got it. All we need is to get a rope. And if we get a rope, we can climb up the side of the building. We can break in through the window. We can steal the money. We can basically buy the sedan chair. And then we've got the rope to pay him back, to climb up and pay him back. And he's none the wiser. Well, Angus thinks, well, it's the best idea we've got. But the problem is a rope costs money. How are these guys going to get a rope? So they start going round all their friends in the building works and begging to borrow a rope. Please let us borrow a rope. But none of their friends are willing to do that. You know, if a rope goes missing off the site, it'll be their heads. They'll lose their jobs. And they don't trust Malachi and Angus enough. They know they've got no money. So now our two lads, they're just broken-hearted, you know. They know they need money to feed their families and keep a roof over their head. They know they need this rope to break in, and they just don't know what to do. So they sit down on the steps of St. Giles Cathedral, and they sit down despondent and wondering what to do. And no idea. And then Malachi looks at Angus and says, well, we're sitting here. We may as well go in and pray. Maybe we'll get a sign of how to help our families. So they walk into the great church. They walk down the corridor and they just kneel down in front of the pulpit and the big cross. And they lower their heads and they clap their hands together. And just at that moment, above their heads, the great bell of St. Giles starts to ring. And Malachi jumps up and he starts dancing about and he starts going, the bells, the bell, the bell. And Angus is a wee bit confused, but Malachi grabs him and drags him out of St. Giles and says, the bell, the bell. And Angus has no idea what's happening until Malachi goes, the bell has a rope. And then it dawns on Angus what Malachi's saying. The bell has a rope. And Malachi's saying, we can steal the rope. We can get the bell rope. We can climb up, steal the money, and then return the bell rope. No one will be any the wiser. But of course, Angus is thinking, oh, no. We can't steal from the church. No way can we steal from the church. But his good Irish friend is persuasive. And eventually, Angus is browbeaten down into agreeing to basically steal the bell rope. Well, they plot, they plan, and they come up with the best idea for it. And that night, they sneak into St. Giles and hide in one of the dark corners. They wait until the doors are locked. They wait until the keeper of the church goes to his wee room and settles down, and it's pitch black. It's the dark of night. There's just enough light by the moon shining through. And the two boys sneak out of their hiding place. They creep towards the bell tower. They grab the door handle for the bell tower and they turn it, and it's locked. The bell tower's locked. The stair access to get them all the way up to the actual bell so they can get the rope is locked. But what makes it worse for them, they can actually walk in to the bell tower. You can actually walk in and look up, and there's the rope in front of you, and you can look up to the great bell above you, but there's just no way to climb up the stairs to it. And now both the lads are standing there just in disbelief. Their hearts are broken. How can all this be happening? But as Malachy's looking up, this realization dawns on him, and he looks at Angus and says, all is not lost. I have an idea. I will climb up the rope and I'll cut off enough that we need. All you need to do is hold the rope so it doesn't swing and the bell doesn't ring. Now, Angus thinks this is a perfect idea. This is the solution. So he holds on to the rope, and up Malachy shimmies away, up 30, 40 feet, until he reckons they've got enough rope. And he takes out his knife and he cuts the rope from underneath him, and down falls this big, thick, heavy bell rope. Now he forgets to warn Angus. So Angus is holding the bottom, and all of a sudden he feels it loose, looks up to get scunnered on the head by this big, thick rope, and down he crashes onto the ground, dazed and confused. But up the top of the bell rope is Malachy, still clinging on with the bell rope cut beneath him. And he thinks to himself, how am I going to get down? And then it comes to him. What an idiot he is. If I just cut the rope above my hands, I'll be able to get down now. And that's what he does. He takes his knife and he cuts the rope above his hands. And of course, he plummets down the bell tower just in time for poor Angus to get back up on his feet, look up and crash. Down comes Malachy on top of him. And now both the boys are at the bottom of the bell tower, roaring and bellowing and screaming in agony. The bell has now been disrupted and it is ringing away crazily. And in the middle of the night, the whole of Edinburgh is woken up. The keeper of the church is up and wondering what's wandering about. The doors of the church are being banged as the city watch is there. And the doors are opened, and in charge the city watch to see what's going on. And they find are two laddies, all broken and bruised at the bottom of the bell tower. Well, they drag those two boys out the front of St. Giles to the toll booth prison that's sitting there. And they get locked up for a few days awaiting trial. And Malachy and Angus do go to court. They go to trial. And it's said that they were brought into the courtroom on stretchers, bandaged and bruised and battered, looking a sorry sight for each other. But they had none other than a very famous hanging judge. Oh my goodness, his name's escaped me. You must forgive me. The very famous hanging judge at Edinburgh. This man's reputation was phenomenal. He basically was a big fella that would sit scowling at all the prisoners. He said he would have 2 bottles of port sitting beside him that he would sip throughout the day while passing sentence. And he sat and listened to the story that was told. He was basically told, the prosecutors basically saying all this horrible stuff about these 2 boys. But Malachy and Angus had one thing on their side. Henry Coburn, very famous young barrister at the time, very quick-witted, intelligent and smart. And he countered all the arguments and then told the story of the 2 young men. He told about their plight, about their plan. He told the jury about all the trials and tribulations and what had happened to them in the church. And this is why they're in such a sorry state before you today. And it was said that at the end of his argument, he left the whole courtroom in fits of laughter at the stupidity of these two young men. And then our hanging judge put on his black hat, took a sip of his port, and then passed sentence. Malachi and Angus were quivering in their boots when they saw this. But the sentence was not what it was expected to be. The judge looked at these two foolish lads and simply stated, I will not go to the expense and effort of the city of Edinburgh hanging both of you two boys, when it's so obviously clear that you'll find a way to do it to yourselves one day. And with that, he passed a very simple sentence. The boys had to work off their debt to replace the rope for the church. And they had to do some community work around the city. And it was said that Angus and Malachi, they worked their backsides off furiously out of guilt for the church, out of guilt for their acts, to pay off the rope to the church. And that was done incredibly quickly. And when all their other sentencing was finished, on the last day, they received an envelope. And that envelope told them to go down to the grass market where one of the cabinet makers was waiting for them. And when they arrived, they were presented with a brand new sedan chair from an unknown benefactor. And the two boys were so delighted. And it was said from that day they worked from noon till night, running round the city, earning an honest living, transporting the rich and wealthy around Edinburgh. But the most curious thing of all was their first ever passenger. It was none other than the very same hanging judge who had let them off so leniently. And it was said at the end of the journey, well, Malachi and Angus, they couldn't bring themselves to ask him for any payment. But it became obvious and very clear to the two boys as the judge travelled with them every single day that he had absolutely no intention of ever paying for his fare when those boys transported him around Edinburgh. And that is the tale of the two bell ringers of Edinburgh. Angus and Malachi actually went on. Thank you, Cassie. Went on to become two of the most famous and hardworking sedan chairs. They built up a wee empire in Edinburgh and their legacy continued. But they're two characters that are just fantastic. And their story is just tremendous in Edinburgh. But that I thought was a nice wee story of St. Giles, rather than going through some of the religious feather, the John Knox incident. I thought I would start the tour with something a little bit more relaxed and fun. But let's move on now, folks. If you're on Google Maps, we're going to be heading away from St. Giles towards the castle. This is an old ink drawing from, I believe, the Lawn Market. So basically, if you were heading up the Royal Mile, you would cross the crossroads, head up a wee bit further, and you come to the Lawn Market. What we actually have here is the old St. Giles Cathedral in the background with the traditional crown headpiece at the top of the tower. Although the clock face is something that doesn't exist today, so that's quite interesting. But this gives you another great example of how kind of really compact Auld Reekie or Edinburgh was. Now, the next story I kind of want to move on to is actually onto the Lawn Market. And what I will say about Edinburgh, a lot of the characters, we have this weird thing in Scotland. If you're a scoundrel, if you're a rascal, or if you're relatively famous, you get a pub. I don't know why. We just always reward people with a bar. It's the weirdest thing ever. And there's a couple more bars that we'll kind of look at throughout this tour, which are related to stories. But it's a weird thing. And the guy I want to speak about now is this guy, Deacon Brodie. I absolutely love Deacon Brodie. He's one of those characters in Edinburgh, which you probably have heard of. But apparently this is a representation to him. I will point out this is Deacon Brodie, not me. Okay. Again, faux pas with the kilt, had it tucked wrong, and those too high. We'll just ignore my fashion sense in the early days of my tour. But William Deacon Brodie was an amazing character. We're actually standing outside of the Brodie Deacon's Cafe, which is actually part of Deacon's Close. Now, that gives you an idea immediately if you know much about Edinburgh history. If you're famous or a family of wealth, quite often you have a close named after you. Deacon's Close actually was where the house of the Deacon, the Brodie family, should I say, lived. So it's not Deacon Close, it's Brodie Close. Jeez, sorry, folks. Brodie Close. And you'll find that if you walk up and down Edinburgh's Royal Mile, all the wee closes and wines, some of them have really obvious names. Some of them are named after what happened there. Fish Market Close, that's where the fish market was. Advocates Close was actually where a lot of the advocates, the legal people, lived. And there's some that are named after famous people because their family was wealthy enough to basically own the whole area. So the close was named after them. Brodie Close is a great example of that, and this is actually kind of what's tucked in behind this rather handsome visage of Deacon Brodie. So he came from money. He came from wealth. He came from a family of reasonable status. His father was a councilman, and Brodie himself became a councilman. Deacon is actually a title. Basically, Deacon William Brodie or William Deacon Brodie is a title which basically said that he was actually a part of a guild. He was the head of a guild. This particular guild was it was the cabinet makers for him. He was a carpenter and cabinet maker by trade, a locksmith by trade, but he was the head of the guild. He was also a councilman. He was highly respected. I mean, this man was married. He had children. He would walk around the town being benevolent and handing out wealth and glory. People loved him and adored him. Brodie was just one of those perfect men. His front face was just, he could do no wrong. He was beloved. He was adored, a family man, a loving family man. He was just the perfect citizen. And that was during the day. At night, Brodie was something completely different. He was a gambler. He would go to all the taverns, all the, because we might have children watching, all the homes of ill repute. And basically, that was him. He was basically a man that was gambling, drinking, womanizing. It was said that he had 2 mistresses and another 5 children with them. So he had a fair big family. The problem is, he's a cabinet maker and a councilman. He has a big house. He has a huge family now between 3 ladies, his wife and his 2 mistresses. He literally has all these expenses and he doesn't earn that much. You know, cabinet maker, even if you're the guild master, even if you're a councilman, you're not making much money. And Brodie is basically struggling, because he's got a gambling addiction. He loves drinking every night. He's out partying and he has problems in his life. But his actual work comes up with a solution. You see, part of Deacon Brodie's day work is going around the city, fixing and repairing and making stuff for the rich and wealthy. He has given access to some of their houses. He's given access to banks and offices. And Brodie realizes incredibly quickly that he can actually get away with murder here, so to speak. He can get away with anything, not murder. That's the wrong word. But what he does is he learns really quickly where people store their wealth, where they store their goods. He learns very quickly where they store their keys. And because he's a locksmith by trade, he's always carrying wax. So what he would do is when they're not looking, he would make an impression of the keys. And then basically he would go back to his workshop, make a brand new key, and in the middle of the night, he would sneak in and rob people. But he was a clever man. He wouldn't rob them blind. He wouldn't basically take everything. He would just take a few wee things at a time, because if you're doing that through enough houses, you're making enough money. So Brodie became this notorious thief and scoundrel, and nobody knew the two faces. By day, beloved councilman, guild master, beloved father and husband. By night, he was out drinking and gambling and robbing and rubbing noses with some of the vilest characters that Edinburgh had, and he was comfortable in both lives. But his gambling debts and his family debts were constantly building up. And Brodie realised that, well, he had to do something big. He knew he couldn't live this way for the rest of his life. He had to get the big score. So he recruited a couple of guys from a local pub. One was, I think, a John Brown. Another guy, his name escapes me. He had a fantastic nickname. It was something like the Vicious Grocer. Oh, we had some great nicknames for guys. But basically, they came up with this plan. And it was a very simple plan. They would rob the customs office of Edinburgh. That was further down the Royal Mile. It was actually outside the old city Flodden walls at this point, but it was the customs office. And there was gold and riches and stock and silks and whatever you could imagine, all the stuff coming into the city. So they plotted and planned. They mapped out the building. They worked it for days. They made sure they scouted it. They knew all the guards. They knew all the movements, and they prepared. And then they went in and broke into the place one night. And they broke in excited, moving fast, and the place was empty. They had plotted, they'd planned, they'd scouted it out, but they hadn't bothered to check the timetables of the customs office. It was said that everything had been moved to its proper locations the night before. So when Brodie and his men broke in, the customs office was empty. There was nothing there. They tore the place apart, and it was said they found about 13, 14 pounds in loose money. Now, 13, 14 pounds between this group is nothing, and they are furious. They are so angry. Their plot has failed. Things have gone wrong. They start blaming each other. One of them was blaming Brodie because he was a notorious drunkard. He got everything wrong. And as they were arguing, things go from bad to worse. One of the customs officers comes back early from his rounds, and it's said that Brown, or one of the other men, leapt on the customs officer to stop him from giving out a cry and started beating him, and sadly beat him so savagely that he killed him. So now Brodie and his men, they're not just robbers, they have become thieves, and they flee. Well, and making plans to escape the city, they don't make them quick enough. In fact, it's said that one of his own men turned king's evidence on him because they were so terrified of getting hung, they basically gave the whole gang up. There is actually another story that it was a dog that caught them. Side story. Apparently, to break into the customs office, they had to acquire a large piece of farming equipment. So they went to a local farm, stole the equipment, but the farmer's dog, if memory serves, caught them in the act and chased them. And one of the stories, and this is maybe not true, but I always love it because it's one of those really humorous side stories, that during the court case, the dog was brought in to kind of give evidence. And because the dog barked at some people and didn't bark at others, and of course it barked at Brodie and all his men, it was decided that these were the men that robbed the farmer, ergo robbed the customs office, committed murder, and therefore these were the guilty party. This is Edinburgh, folks. Trust me, this isn't even the strangest kind of add-on addition to any story you can imagine in this city. But anyway, the results are they get tried, they get sentenced, and basically Brodie and his men are to be hung, basically at the Tolbooth prison outside St. Giles Cathedral. However, there's so many wee twists and turns in Brodie's story, and I love it. This is why he's legend. One story actually tells us that the gallows that Brodie was hung on, he had his hand in designing it. He didn't make it. He had his hand in designing it to be a far more efficient gallows. So effectively, Brodie designed the gallows that saw him hung. And he was dropped on the gallows. And he was declared dead. And William Brodie, date has escaped me, 1780s. 1780 something. William Brodie was declared dead, and that should be the end of his story. But this is Edinburgh, folks, and it never ends so beautifully simple. So, here we go. William Brodie. Nobody knows to this day if he died. Nobody knows if Brodie actually hung to death. There is many a story that says he actually bribed the hangman. His men basically bribed the doctor. You see, what happened is when his body dropped, a group of his men ran in, grabbed the body and whisked it away before anybody could get to it. They said it was so the mob didn't rip it apart. They said it was so the surgeons didn't get a hold of it for dissection, all that kind of weird stuff. But one of the stories actually tells us that the chances are it's because he faked his death. You see, there's a potential that he bribed one of his guards to smuggle in a brass tube for him to swallow, meaning when he was dropped from the rope, his neck wouldn't break and his neck wouldn't constrict. There's a story that said he actually had a hook in his clothing that the hangman hooked onto the rope just to avoid so much of the jarring as well. So basically, when he dropped, all he needed to do was play dead. The doctor's note that declares him dead is also under kind of an idea that he bribed that doctor to basically declare him dead. And what Brodie did is he escaped with money and fled to the Americas or into Europe. And there is a great belief that this actually happened. And this is why I love Brodie, because basically nobody knows if he actually lived or died. He was buried. There was a grave for Deacon Brodie, and because of all this this kind of rumor, like even back then, people were thinking, "Oh, did he actually die? Didn't he?" The people of Edinburgh actually demanded that the city council open up his coffin, dig him up, and open him up, and they did. They dug up the coffin. They opened it up. They looked inside. They closed the coffin. They buried it again, and they told nobody what they discovered inside that coffin. So to this day, nobody actually knows if Brodie is in there or if he did actually escape using his cunning and guile. And just to add a greater mystery to the story, because I love this, nobody actually knows where he's buried anymore. The documentation and location of his grave is now a mystery because basically Edinburgh was quite prone to fires. Remember I told you about the towering tenements made of wood? Yeah. Were not the cleverest at the time. People had to heat their homes, even though they were told they weren't allowed a fire. I want you to imagine cold, damp, dreich, wet, nasty, miserable Scotland and those wooden buildings. People had to heat themselves so they didn't die. And quite often, half the city would regularly go up in flames. And because of that, a lot of the documentation was lost. Also add riots and mischief. But at the end of the day, sadly, Deacon Brodie, we will never know the full answer. Nobody knows where he's buried. There is no evidence to know where he's buried. So we do not know if he managed to get away. So I'm sitting here in Canada, and for all I know, there could be relatives of Brodie in Canada or in America or all over Europe. For all we know, he was a man who loved the ladies, and basically he potentially got away to live a completely different life. And that's a wee story of Deacon Brodie, but it's better. Because Deacon Brodie, his legend is so loved. You may have heard of a movie called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Well, that character is actually reputedly a relative of Deacon Brodie. She is a more modern relative. That's how the writer created her. And of course, one of the most famous books of all, one of my favorites, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, is in fact based on Deacon Brodie, the dual character of that man. But it's deeper. Because I was always used to say in my tours, Jekyll and Hyde is loosely based on Deacon Brodie, but Jekyll and Hyde is also based on Edinburgh, a city with two characters, a dark and a good side. And the whole point of doing a walking tour in Edinburgh is nobody ever wants to hear about the good side. So, as I would say in my tour, it's time to move on to explore some more of that darkness. So we're going to basically, if you're looking at Google Maps, we're going to head along what is known as George the Fourth Bridge. Sorry about this tiny little image that I have of George the Fourth Bridge here. But basically, it is all I have is as a reference for you. Let me just bring that back up. And I noticed there was a few comments. So imagine we're walking, we're stretching our legs. If you're on a treadmill, you know, this is great. Do it. Let's just see Janice. Janice, you're totally right. Should I say Janice? Liana, hello. Holly, hello. oh gosh, sorry, Holly. That's why I'm trying to keep it clean, because I realized there might be kids here, and I'm sorry. It's really hard to cover some of this history without covering delicate things. So I do apologize that you've now got a difficult question to answer. I'm sorry. I'm Scottish. I try my best to be polite. Okay, so George the Fourth Bridge is a huge bridge. I mentioned at the beginning it's spanning, we have 7 hills in Edinburgh. They actually built bridges to level off Edinburgh a wee bit and basically take out a lot of the ups and downs. And George the Fourth Bridge is one of those. It is spanning what is known as the Valley of the Cowgate, the Great Cowgate Valley, which is this tremendously steep slope. If you've ever traveled Edinburgh, you'll know there's an old saying we have when somebody asks for directions, the response is normally, oh, it'll be uphill somewhere. Because even when you're going downhill in Edinburgh, you're usually going uphill. It is homeschooling. Well, that's an interesting educational piece, Holly. I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness, I feel so bad. Thankfully, I know these kids and they're wonderful, but I just feel like, oops. So basically, George the Fourth Bridge spans the huge Valley of the Cowgate. Now, as you're walking along George the Fourth Bridge, you come to a wee part, and I should have an image here for you just to give you an idea. And this is it. This is basically one of the bridge archways that spans the valley. It's just this monstrous big slope. And what they've done in Edinburgh is they've built the buildings kind of leaning like along the straight line and basically kind of to balance up the slopes. But one of the interesting things about a lot of the bridges in Edinburgh is there's buildings on the bridges. So nobody actually realizes that you're walking along a bridge. Most people think this is George the Fourth Bridge that we're looking at here in this image. But it's not. George the Fourth Bridge goes from the Royal Mile all the way along to Bedlam Theatre. It's about 300, 400 yards, feet, something meters long. It's a monstrously long bridge. The engineering that we did in Edinburgh was pretty phenomenal. And there's 5 more of these bridges spanning these hills. But going back to a wee bit of Edinburgh history, George the Fourth Bridge, named after George the Fourth, the King. If you've ever heard my kilt story, you know what we all think about him. Hilarious fellow. But basically, the 7 hills of Edinburgh and these bridges spanning basically were designed to smooth off the areas of Edinburgh, but they're also designed to kind of keep the rich and famous above the level of the poor. It gave them transit routes because, interesting enough, you had the new town, you had Old Town, and then you had the educational college facilities. So you had the Old Town right in the heart. So the rich and wealthy had to travel through this zone. And they decided they wanted these kind of facilities built to allow them a faster transit so that they didn't need to mingle with the poorer classes and the criminal classes. So we had these bridges built. But the downside to that is you've got all these valleys and all this kind of area. And Edinburgh is just this amazing filthy city. And if I take you back to a wee bit of that filth, because it's to give you an understanding of where we are with Edinburgh as a city. So I want you to imagine a walled city. I want you to imagine all the criminal classes poor. I want you to imagine just this city, towering tenements again, and it's just dark and nasty. I don't think I've got any images of the stonework to give you an idea. The soot in the air, it's called Auld Reekie for a reason. Waste is in the streets, but there's another problem. And this just paints another image of Edinburgh. We do not have any toilets. The Romans never got into Scotland on full force, so they didn't bring their lovely straight roads. If you've been to the Highlands, there you go. That explains it. They didn't bring their baths. They didn't bring their plumbing. So Edinburgh has none of that. We literally have no toilets. Here's another bit of homeschooling for the kids. What we had in every room was a bucket. And I should explain, because of the overcrowding in Edinburgh, you could have a room, let's just say a 6x6 room, which could house anything from 6 to 10 people. Every room was overcrowded. You could have multiple families living in a big room. Some of the rooms that said held 10 to 12 people. So you've got all these people living in this one room, and there's no toilet. All there is the bucket. And in that bucket goes everything. Pee, poo, dust, all the dirt, food scraps, a dead rat goes in there. Your granny dies, you stick her in that bucket. And that bucket sits there all day, because there's only one time to flush that bucket, and that is 10 o'clock at night. That's when you get to flush. And there's a very unique flush in Edinburgh. So I want to paint you a picture. You're walking through the streets of Edinburgh. You're a tourist. You've enjoyed Edinburgh as much as you can. You've maybe just come out of one of the taverns, which coincidentally shut at 10 o'clock. You've maybe had a few wee drams. You're feeling happy with your world. And all of a sudden, every window in this city flies open. All of a sudden, there's faces at the windows, and they shout this very strange language. They shout, "Gardez Lou." I should explain, the Scots and the French got on really well. The Scots loved the French. We loved their language. There's a lot of French architecture in Edinburgh because we love them. There was a thing called the Old Alliance. They failed to help us at Flodden, which is why so many Scots, that's why that was a disaster again. But we loved the language so much, but because we're Scottish, we weren't very good at it. So we messed up the language. So what should have been, I believe, gardez-vous, again, I can't pronounce French very well, so I apologize, or beware, came out in this rather horrendous "Gardez-Lou." And then everyone took their buckets and flushed. So I want you to imagine that you've just come out of that tavern and all these windows open. As a tourist, the first thing you would do is you would look up. Then all of a sudden you would hear this strange language, all these faces in a strange language. Your mouth might drop open as if to go, what is happening? And then everybody flushes at the same time. And it's said that is when you get your true taste of Scotland. Yeah, I know, it's a bad joke. But anyway, that is basically how we flushed in Scotland. So I want you to imagine all the criminal elements, crowded, congested, narrow streets, and then add them swimming in waste, swimming in sewage. It was said on an average day in Edinburgh, you could be wading shin, if not ankle deep in raw sewage. And of course, because of the hills, everything flowed downhill. So the Norloch, which is Princess Street Gardens, which was the drinking water, is downhill. So our drinking water filled with sewage. Things like the Cowgate filled with sewage. The place was just disgusting, and people are living in this. So The wealthy wanted the bridges because it didn't just keep them away from the poor, it kept them slightly above ground from the sewage. So it was a particularly unpleasant place to live. And here's me just telling in the Cowgate, but this is one of the old images that I actually found. This isn't one of my images. This is a slightly more modern image from 1860. But it gives you a kind of idea of the old city. And there's even some of the old open arches. You see, these arches in the Cowgate and these bridges actually got closed over and they were created into vaults for storage facility. So there's a whole, literally, folks, there's about 8 tours worth I could do in Edinburgh. There's so many different stories. But because I've just spoken about something nasty, let's move on to something nice. I've mentioned Jekyll and Hyde, a great piece of Scottish literature. Edinburgh has inspired so many pieces of literature. And I don't know if you can see, because it's a very small image, but there's a very interesting little note in this window of the Elephant House. And it is I think they call it the official home of Harry Potter. Now, I know that there might be a young man watching this who likes his Harry Potter computer games. But I know there's a lot of people that love Harry Potter, and Edinburgh is the home of Harry Potter. It's an amazing place. I'm just checking my time here just to make sure I'm not going to run over, because when I did walking tours, I always just ran over. But this is the Elephant House. This is actually the place where it's said that J.K. Rowling wrote her books, Harry Potter, because it's a beautiful big coffee shop and it looks out over onto Greyfriars Kirkyard, a beautiful old graveyard in Edinburgh. So the Elephant House has claimed the writing place of Harry Potter. But I'm going to break a few hearts. It's not. It's actually not the place she wrote it. It's one of the places, but it's actually said the location that she wrote Harry Potter, or most of it, was on the Royal Mile. You see, if everyone knows her story. She was a single mother. She was very poor. She was living in Edinburgh, and basically, to save electricity and power during the day, she went to coffee shops and wrote these magnificent books. And she used a lot of the coffee shops, but the one she actually wrote most in is on the Royal Mile, not the Elephant House. However, I will say the reason that we give the Elephant House the title of the official home of Harry Potter is because the place that she wrote it is no longer the quaint little coffee shop on the Royal Mile. It is the dreadful... My wife's going to shoot me for this. It is the dreadful corporate coffee shop known as Starbucks. Dun, dun, dun. I'm in trouble now. Yeah. The reason I say that is we all love Starbucks, but we can't allow them to say that they're the official birthplace of Harry Potter. It's just not on. Nobody would like Harry Potter to be written in a Starbucks. It just doesn't work. So, because she used the Elephant House, we are literally giving J.K. Rowling the opportunity to to say this is where it was, and the Elephant House has claimed it. And if you're walking along George IV Bridge, I recommend it if you ever get to Edinburgh once everything's back open. The Elephant House is an amazing place to sit, have a coffee, and enjoy. And there's some beautiful Harry Potter stuff in there. So the Elephant House on the bridges is a great place to stop. But we're going to move on to our next location. And I mentioned about taverns. Yep. Another famous character in Edinburgh is Greyfriars Bobby, the famous dog. So what do you do when you've got a famous dog? You give him a bar. But here he is. Little Bobby. Oh, everybody loves Bobby. I used to do walking tours in Edinburgh, and Greyfriars Bobby is one of those constants that you need to do in Edinburgh. Everyone knows about this wonderful, loyal, and tenacious little puppy dog. But I'm going to make a public announcement here. Do you see this, folks? On his nose? This is disgraceful. This is people rubbing a statue's nose and wearing it down. For some reason, people think rubbing statues gives them luck. It doesn't. It just costs a lot of money to repair. Unfortunately, this statue has been around for well over 100 years, if memory serves, and it's only recently people are damaging it. So I'm just letting you know, if you ever visit Edinburgh, admire Bobby. Just don't stroke Bobby, okay? Don't rub his nose. It's not on. What we got here? Preach it. Thank you, Josh. Killer almond croissant. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Samantha. I love that. Oh. Anyway, let's move into the graveyard. What I'm standing in front of here, folks, is actually a memorial grave to Greyfriars Bobby, the dog. It is not a real grave. It is just a tribute grave. Because of the laws of graveyards, you're not allowed to bury animals in the graveyard. But one of the things I need to point out is this. This kind of witch's pyre that you see building up. And the next photo is even worse. There's toys and biscuits and money. For some reason, people love to leave this little dog's grave all these sort of things for him to play with. It's so sweet. But see, when you walk in the height of summer and you can't actually, like, hopefully you can see the marker. Some of it, sometimes it's up to here. It's halfway up the grave. You can't even see the stone because people have left all this crazy stuff. It's a beautiful gesture, but it's absolutely weird to see people leaving memorials to a puppy dog. However, if you don't know the story of little Bobby, I'll very quickly go over it because it's a lovely story. It starts with this chap, John Gray, and he's a shepherd who lives out on the Pentland Hills. His whole life is about working the land. He has basically lived there since a lad, and now he's growing older, and he's realizing that, you know, in his old age, he's getting a wee bit lonelier as he's working the land. So he decides to get a companion, and he goes out and he finds himself a little puppy dog, a little Skye Terrier, and he calls it Bobby, and Bobby becomes his companion when he's working the land. Now, the reason we say companion and not a working dog is simply this. If you don't know what a Skye Terrier is, you've seen the image of Bobby. Effectively, it's a mop with legs. Okay? A mop with legs. Tiny, small, yappy dog. No good for sheep. In fact, probably Bobby was scared of the sheep. They certainly wouldn't have been scared of him. So we know he was a companion. And basically, John Gray and Bobby became inseparable, working the land for day in and day out. And this was their lives. But then one day, the most unusual thing happened. John was called to the farm. He was given a handshake and a wee bag of coin. Because at the age of 50, the farm decided he was too old to work and they retired him. And this was devastating for John because he had basically worked the land all his life. This is all he knew. And now he had a wee bit of money and his possessions and wee Bobby and nowhere to go. And all he could afford at that time was to move into Auld or Edinburgh. And worse than that, he had to move in to the Cowgate, the most filthy, vile, most criminally ridden area of the city. And it was said that John tried to get wee odd jobs here and there, but there wasn't much work going. And for a man that used to work the land, he's now in this smoky, filthy city. That's no good for him. And unfortunately, he starts to get very ill. He gets a cough. And that cough develops into a chest infection. That chest infection develops into pneumonia. And in no time at all, sadly, old Jock or John Gray has died, leaving, thankfully, enough money for a wee funeral. But leaving wee Bobby all by himself. I'm kind of glad that Hamish wasn't in the room at this point. I might have actually cried if I'd seen my dog. I'd be like, oh God, don't do that. But he's left poor wee Bobby by himself. This wee Skye Terrier, his owner's just passed away. Well, it's said on the day of the funeral, when old Jock is taken through the streets, there's a fair procession with him, and he's taken into Greyfriars Kirkyard and laid to rest. And the mourners are all standing round paying their respects, when all of a sudden they hear it, a tiny pitter-patter of feet coming into the graveyard. As little Bobby scurries into the graveyard, pushes through the mourners, looks at the grave, and as you can see, he reads it. John Gray, Shepherd. I don't think this one actually says Shepherd. This one's been replaced, hasn't it? Yep. The original one used to say Shepherd. And he looks at that, and little Bobby reads the gravestone and then goes, aye, that's the fella. And it's said that he lies down on his master's grave. Now, all the mourners looking at this little puppy dog, they'd have been like, oh my goodness, look at that. And thinking it was so cute and so lovely, looking at this wee dog lying on its master's grave. But the groundskeeper wouldn't have been too impressed. You see, consecrated land, you're not allowed dogs. So he'd have picked up little Bobby out of respect and taken him to the gates of the graveyard and put him out into the street. But that wasn't going to stop Bobby the next day. Pitter patter, he squeezes through the mourners, sits on the grave, and everyone's like, oh, he's lovely. But the groundskeeper would not have been happy. So he might have grabbed Bobby by the scruff of the neck that day, taken him out to the street and thrown him into the street. And then the next day, pitter patter. But there's no mourners because John Gray's not that popular. And little Bobby comes and lies on his master's grave again, but the groundskeeper would have been furious. And now that there's no one to see, he'd have grabbed Bobby by the scruff of the neck. He'd have marched him to those gates. And he would have drop-kicked him into the street and then locked the gates behind him. Ooh. Well, the story tells us that Bobby was not to be deterred. Little Bobby was a tenacious and loyal and loving dog. And he found any way he could into that graveyard. He would basically burrow under the gates and go and lie in his master's grave. They'd kick him out. They'd lower the gates. He would climb over the gates. They'd kick him out. They would put extensions onto the gates. He would find a hole in the wall. He'd go through. They would have to cement the wall out after kicking him up. He would abseil down the side of the buildings. They would throw him out. He'd parachute from the castle. Basically any way he could. Bobby would find a way into this graveyard to lie on his master's grave. And the story tells us that little Bobby, for 14 years, lay on his master's grave, showing love, loyalty, and tenacity, until one day, sadly, the groundskeeper came out, and there, lying on the master's grave, was little Bobby, who himself had passed away. But in the time that Bobby lived, in the time that he'd shown this, things happened. Tourism came to Edinburgh to see this wee dog. He was given the keys to the city. He didn't have any hands, but he had a set of keys. Bobby was treated like this royalty. He was fed by all the local restaurants. He became famous, so famous that in years to come, an author, Eleanor Atkinson, wrote a novel about him. And Walt Disney himself made a movie about Greyfriars Bobby. And that is the very quick, loving story of Greyfriars Bobby, because I'm trying to be nice and I don't want to go into any of the other stories. If anyone wants to hear the other side of the history of Greyfriars Bobby, we'll do that. But that one needs to be for adults because I don't want to break any kids' hearts today. So that is the story of Greyfriars Bobby. This man here is connected to him, James Brown Sexton. He was actually one of the restaurant owners that fed and cared for Bobby. Apparently, he actually made a lot of money off Bobby by feeding him and enticing him to sit by the fire in the restaurant during the cold days, so people would come into his restaurant. You know, it's still a lovely story. He still cared for the little puppy dog. The other side of that, I'm not going to go into. But Greyfriars Kirkyard is a bonny place. If you ever get a chance to visit, it's filled with beautiful gravestones, mausoleums, artwork. It's like an art gallery in there. I appreciate it's a graveyard. You know, I'm sorry, but it is a beautiful graveyard. And it's got some amazing bits of history. I mean, look at that pose. That just shows you how dynamic the history is. What I'm standing next to is a bit of history I talk about a lot, so I won't go into it in great detail. But these are actually resurrection cages. there's a couple of these scattered around the graveyard in different formats. And the idea behind these, as dark as it sounds, folks, is sadly there was a time in Edinburgh where people were stealing dead bodies to sell them to the surgeons for anatomy and medical procedures. It's one of the reasons we now live so long. So it's a double-edged sword. But families, to avoid that happening, would, instead of burying the bodies, would put them in these cages in sacks and allow them to naturally I'm thinking about the kids here now, to naturally change their state, which meant that the bodies would be no use to the anatomists because they needed fresh bodies. So these resurrection cages were a fantastic piece of history, and I could go on about that, and I could get really gruesome and gory, but I'm not going to do that today because I'm trying to keep this a more family tour. The downside to doing this online is when I did this live in the city, I could see who was in my audience, so I could adjust the stories accordingly. Today, because I've got a feeling there might be families watching, I've got to kind of keep things a bit more balanced. But the resurrection cages are always great. However, this graveyard holds more Harry Potter secrets. Does anyone recognize the name on this grave? McGonagall. Yeah. So here's a little secret that maybe a lot of people don't know. I've met J.K. Rowling's. She was a wonderful woman that came around a lot of the tour companies and basically showed a few of them around the place to show some of the sights. She actually came into Greyfriars Kirkyard and loved the place. There's a lot of references. Right next to Greyfriars is a school called Heriot Watt, which is one of the schools she used design work, etc., for Hogwarts. There's a lot of references for Hogwarts from some of the buildings in Edinburgh and around Scotland, but this one she used a little bit of. She used particularly a bit of the folklore from, is it Heriot's or George Watts? Gosh, my memory's going. It's been 5 years. She used a bit of folklore. You see, this was an old school in Edinburgh with high walls, and the people of Edinburgh were superstitious. They were very, they believed in witchcraft and wizards and all the creatures and beasties. And because this school was very secretive, it was for the rich and wealthy, and the walls were very high, they actually dubbed it a school of witchcraft and wizardry. And it was said that on a Sunday afternoon, the kids would all get their broomsticks and ride about the playing field with balls, throwing balls through hoops. And J.K. took that folklore and adapted it into being what we now know as Quidditch in the Harry Potter books. So again, Edinburgh has influenced even some, so many pieces of literature, but she borrowed some of the names. If you wander around Greyfriars Kirkyard, you will find graves for Crookshanks, Moody, McGonagall, Black. Here is McGonagall. And of course, the more famous ones, such as Thomas Riddle. There is a whole family line of Thomas Riddles there, and these are all genuine graves in Greyfriars. And then there is the last grave. Not this one. This one. Greyfriars Graveyard has got a lot of weird history. It's actually known on the old maps as the Valley of the Greyfriars. So, it's a valley. However, when you walk into it, you actually walk into a hill. And that's because it's basically been built up over the years. It used to be below the place called the Grass Market, but Greyfriars Kirkyard now towers above the Grass Market. Edinburgh has been a city that's seen so much death, disaster, plague, tenement collapse, some just horrible things that basically Greyfriars became an overflow graveyard. There's actually articles in the history books that say we had to import soil to cover up the dead bodies. So effectively, when you walk in Greyfriars, you're walking on a huge man-made mound of the dead. And as a result, because a lot of the graves are mass graves, it means that there's light soil dustings. We don't have the 6 foot under idea. And what that basically means is when it rains in Edinburgh, quite often the earth in Greyfriars gets really marshy, and sometimes it gives back a wee present. There is a groundskeeper that used to be there. He probably isn't there anymore, but his whole job was to go around after heavy rain showers with a shovel and hammer bits of bone back into the earth. There is actually a mausoleum at the bottom of the hill where any bits that won't go back in are stored until they can rebury them. That's a bit of a dark bit of history for you there, folks, and a little surprise treat if you ever visit Greyfriars. It is the graveyard that keeps giving. However, it does taketh away as well. One of the biggest problems about Greyfriars, if you go in, you'll just see a lot of open ground in areas, and you're wondering, well, if this is such a busy graveyard, where's all the gravestones? I can assure you, folks, they are still there. Yep. You just can't see them anymore. Because when that ground gets so moist and damp, the weight of the gravestones is actually forcing them to sink. And because it's a heritage site, nothing can be done about it. It's just going to happen. So what you're seeing here is actually a gravestone, which I believe was between 4.5 feet to 5 feet tall at one point. And this is all that's left of it. Well, actually, that's a lie, because this is a really old photo. And I think that gravestone's now gone. And the fun thing about that gravestone is Moody, Black, McGonagall, Thomas Riddle, they're all there. Apart from the most famous Harry Potter character, Hermione. No, Harry Potter. That is the grave of a gentleman that was called Harry Potter in Edinburgh. If memory serves, that is I might be wrong. It might be another one that's slightly over, but I'm pretty sure that's the Harry Potter grave. What that basically means, though, is it doesn't exist anymore. It has sunk beneath the earth, but J.K. Rowling's did borrow a lot of the names from this graveyard. So there is an interesting fact about Greyfriars. There's so much more. It has the Black Mausoleum, the Mackenzie Poltergeist, Adam Smith, many a famous person, poet, mathematician, architect. I mean, it's a really famous graveyard. So there's so many things in there. But let's move on, folks, very quickly, because time is ticking and I'm running behind. So to finish up the tour, we head now down into the Grassmarket. So we're kind of doing a bit of a loop. And the Grassmarket is a huge, busy, bustling part of Edinburgh. It is a place of lots of bars and restaurants and fun activities for all. And this is just a wee bit of it. In fact, the road that I'm looking up here is called Victoria Street. Yes, Coburn Street's the other one. And this is actually another Harry Potter reference. This is one of the influences for Diagon Alley. So again, all over the city, huge references for Harry Potter. However, I mentioned pubs earlier. Here is the White Hart Inn. And this is actually a very famous bar as well. Not for named after a famous person, but this is actually the bar where William Burke and William Hare, the two famous Resurrection Men serial killers, came up with their idea. This is one of the oldest bars in Edinburgh, and this is actually the location that they plotted and planned to commit their dastardly acts in Edinburgh. And then, of course, our last famous person of the tour, Maggie Dixon. Maggie is one of those stories that is legendary in Edinburgh. I won't go through the whole story, but to give you the bare bones of it, this is actually one of the stories that is on my storytelling CD. So quite a few people watching this probably have got that already or listened to elements of it. But Maggie, or Half Hang It Maggie, is the woman that actually changed a lot of the legal system in Edinburgh. She basically went to find her husband after he went to work in Newcastle in the coal mines and then disappeared. She started to travel, and halfway up there, and I think it was in the Selkirk area, she ran out of money on the way to Newcastle and took a job in a tavern. While she was working in the tavern, she kind of fell in love with one of the tavern owner's sons, and through, shall we say, their friendship, she found herself in a very awkward situation and became pregnant. But because she was married, Technically, that was illegal. So she tried to hide the pregnancy. And as a result of that, sadly, the baby was given birth to she gave birth to a stillborn. And she totally panicked and hid the baby's body down by the river. It was eventually discovered, traced back to her. She was dragged back to Edinburgh, put on trial, and basically sentenced to death. And she was sentenced to death here. This is the grass market as well. I don't know if you can see this lovely outline. This is basically the gallows, where the old gallows of the grass market was situated. A very tasteful monument, I feel, Edinburgh has created here. I always thought this was a really odd one to do, but Maggie was actually hung to death at these gallows. She was taken from the gallows, checked, put in a box, and carted off by her family to the graveyard. Her family lived out in Preston Pans, a wee bit outside of Edinburgh. So, as was a tradition in Scotland, you toast the dead. So halfway there, they stop at a wee bar. They leave the body in the coffin outside. They go in for a wee whiskey or two, which turns to 3 or 4. And they leave this body stewing in the sun. When they remember about her, they cart her off to the graveyard, start to put her in the grave. And it's just about that point that the body, the coffin starts to move and noises are heard. And when it's opened up, they actually discover Maggie's still alive. Now, they hide her because they know that if she's found, she'll be arrested again. But that does eventually happen. She's put in prison, and a great big legal and religious case breaks out in Edinburgh. The lawyers saying she's a criminal, the religious people fighting, and they basically kept turning and twisting their arguments until one lawyer stepped up and simply said that Maggie Dickson was hung to death. She was sentenced. Here's her death certificate, but yet Maggie Dickson's alive. And of course, they all agreed to this. And that lawyer was very clever and threw it back on the church and said, well, there's only one being that can bring someone back from the dead, and that is God Almighty. And of course, the churches at that point realized they'd been bent over a barrel, and it was called an act of God. And from that day on in Edinburgh, anybody who actually survived the gallows was free. It was called an act of God. They'd been forgiven of all their sins and could continue their lives. And basically, Maggie Dickson was the first person this happened to in Scotland. She ended up growing to a right old age. She was given some compensation from the Crown, and she lived in the grass market and on just off the Canongate until the end of her days, respectively. But she had a new nickname, which was Half Hang It Maggie, because she'd survived the gallows. So basically, from that day on, no matter whatever crime you committed, if you survived the gallows, you were forgiven through an act of God. And it was all because of this lovely lady who now has a bar named after her, Maggie Dickson, or Half Hang It Maggie. And there is just another lovely picture of Victoria Street, beautiful little street to walk up, filled with all interesting shops. There used to actually be, a street, and the reason it got its Harry Potter reputation is because it used to have a lot of what would be the term? New age shops on it, with crystal balls and herbs and incense. And then there was an old broom maker, I kid you not, right in the corner. A long time ago, there was an old broom maker's, and in his windows were just broomsticks, the old besom brooms, which was just amazing. So this is why this particular street kind of had the very Diagon Alley feel to it, folks. But with that, and I kind of had to speed up towards the end because I realized we were getting close to a kind of 2-hour mark there. And I really don't want to run over for you, because I appreciate, although we're all isolated, people still want to do things. And I think it's sunny outside. But Old Edinburgh is a fascinating, amazing city. And some of the stories I've just briefly went over because, I mean, like Birkenhead is really dark and gruesome, but I could go on about that for hours. Maggie Dickson, I kind of went over because it's on my CD, and again, it's a wee bit dark. And as I say, there's kids watching, so I'm trying to keep things a little bit lighter. And Holly, etc., sorry that you now have a whole new branch of homeschooling to do if you're still watching. I did try and keep this as clean as I could without as many complicated things, but it's really hard with Edinburgh history because it is a complicated city. It's oh, thanks, darling. It's now overcast. That makes me feel better. It's basically a very ancient place with hundreds of years of stories. Some of the stories are crazy. If you've ever heard me tell about Brown the Resurrection Man from Surgeons Hall, I mean, it's this really dark story, but it doesn't sound believable. Deacon Brodie doesn't sound believable. If you head the other way down the Royal Mile, you have the Cannibal of the Canonsgate. You've got Charles Dickens references, Robert Burns references. You have Jacobite stories in Edinburgh. You have border reaver tales. You have just this whole wealth of history. And all of it is in this tiny half mile by quarter mile part of the city called the Old Town. And that's pretty much running from the castle down to what we call the Netherbow Port, where the World's End Bar is. And the reason the World's End Bar is called that is because if you left that gate, the gates of Edinburgh, they called it the end of the world. They basically, for a long time in the history, people had this attitude that there was nothing beyond the city of Edinburgh worth going out because it was so terrifying, because the fear of the English attacks, because the fear of cannibals, I kid you not, because of the Highlanders, because of different warring families. It was a dark and brutal country. And of course, you had this wee city living in terror, which in effect created its own misery by overcrowding, by sewage problems, by shortages of food, by city riots. Edinburgh has burned down more times than I know how to tell stories about it. It is just a beautifully crazy and gorgeous city, but it is so worth visiting. And I'm not going to lie, folks, when I was creating this tour, there was a great deal of melancholy as I kept looking at pictures and having all these wonderful memories of this beautiful city that I lived in for 20 years. So if you ever get a chance to visit, this is just a brief glimpse of the city that I've given you from some stories and some very basic images. But it is a fabulous place to visit. Edinburgh Castle has got a lot of history around it. The Holyrood Palace at the far end, which actually was a completely different borough or part of the city. It's now the city, but it wasn't Edinburgh. So here's just to summarize. When we talk about the city of Edinburgh, it was only that wee area. The Canonsgate did exist, and there was buildings there, and Holyrood Palace was down at the bottom, but that wasn't classed as Edinburgh for a while. It was all different sections, and it's like Calgary or any other city. When it grows, it absorbs all these little outside dwelling zones or towns or villages, and they become the greater beast. And that was the same as Edinburgh. It became the greater beast. But as I say, I could do multiple stories. I could do about another 10 tours about this. Edinburgh is just an amazing place, and I do miss it, but I also love where I am now. I'm happy. I have a family, and it's that double-edged sword. But if you ever visit Edinburgh, just soak it up. They recently filmed one of the Marvel movies there. I think it was Infinity Wars or Civil War. I can't remember. It was one of Infinity Wars. I think the starting sequences they did in Edinburgh. It's a city filled with wonder. You've got references there for Outlander. You've got references there for, there's loads of movies and I can't even remember half of them now. Train Spotting, going back years. It's just a city filled with great stories, great literature, great architecture, wonderful people, great performances, and it's the home of the Scottish Storytelling Centre where I learned my trade. So folks, please, if you ever do visit, do just soak up the city and enjoy it. Go to places like the Captain's Bar for your live music. Roam the streets. I always say, people ask me for Edinburgh, what do you do in Edinburgh? And it's like, you just walk up and down all those winding closes and alleyways. Just enjoy the city because it is a marvelous place to be. And I absolutely love it. So folks, I want to thank you for joining me today. This may have been a bit of a random sporadic tour. I have been juggling a few different things here to try and get used to different systems. Hopefully it's not been too off-putting. Hopefully it hasn't distracted too many of the stories. However, I want to thank you for at least letting me try something a bit new, a bit Infinity War, I've just been told, and a bit different. If you did enjoy the tour, it's like what I always would say at the beginning of my tours is this is a free walking tour. But if you enjoy it, it's free by donation. At the end, if you enjoyed it, you decide what it's worth. In the main description of the tour, there are tip jars. If you do decide it's worth something, you know, anything's appreciated in these weird times. Basically, I'm unemployed until September at the earliest. But basically, it's free. This is me doing it for fun and enjoyment. So don't feel obliged to give anything, folks. What I always will say is this, though. I do have, wait a minute, I can do this now. Wait, new technology. Stop sharing. Whoa! If you did enjoy the show, and you do decide to donate, etransfer, or do a tip, I do have copies of my, there we go, my Scottish Bedtime Stories download CD. So if you give over $15 worth, you get a free copy of that. I'll email you the download codes. For that, what I will warn any family member, any family youngsters, these are really dark, gruesome stories, so they're really not suitable for kids. These are the truly dark stories of Edinburgh, because that's just what I love doing. So, folks, thank you very much for joining me today. My throat's going. I'm in my studio. It's becoming a sauna. I've had great fun. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I will be getting back on daily to do my little short story streams every day. And I'm planning on doing in the evenings, probably too late for the UK guys, probably about 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to be doing some reading. I'm probably going to start with Jekyll and Hyde, do a couple of chapters a night, just to allow people to get to sleep. Because I know there's one gentleman, a friend of ours, who said that sometimes he struggles to sleep and he puts on some of my stories and it helps him fall asleep. So he has inspired me doing some bedtime story reading. Of course, I'm Scottish. I'm not going to say they're going to be nice stories. But thanks very much, folks. It's been a pleasure.